If you're anything like me, you've looked at the specs and features of maybe a dozen or more phones when trying to consider which smartphone will be best for your wants and needs. And while there are plenty of great options, it doesn't seem like one single manufacturer puts all of what you want in their phone. And that's probably intentional. If they built the perfect smartphone, then you'd be less likely to buy that phone's successor the following year or years. In this video, I will create a theoretical perfect flagship smartphone with all the specs and features you could ever want. I include the word flagship because when doing research and polling people about their ideal smartphone, one response I got was, "I don't care too much about the specs as long as it's under $150. This video's not for you. Though price is an important consideration for a smartphone, we aren't putting it number one on the priority list. So first, let's see how close the market is to this pie in the sky. What is it that many consumers demand and desire in a phone these days? Based on how the phone designs have trended over the last few years, I think we can narrow it down to 5 main criteria. Great bezel-less display, good battery life, great camera performance, great phone performance or speed, and a reasonable price. I think there are 3 phones that get the closest to fulfilling most of our desires as the consumers. The first being the Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus. It has a bezel-less display, a 4300 mAh battery, great camera array, 12 gigs of RAM, and a Snapdragon 855, so you get great performance, but it comes in a bit pricey at $1,100. The second is the Asus ROG Phone 2. It has a massive 6000 mAh battery, Snapdragon 855 Plus, and up to 12 gigs of RAM, a headphone jack, and you can get it for roughly $600. However, it doesn't have a bezel-less display to opt instead for front-facing speakers. The third is the Xiaomi Mi Note 10, which was just announced. It has a near bezel-less display with just a teardrop notch, a 5-camera array with a 108 megapixel camera, and the highest rating on DxOMark for smartphones, a large 5260 mAh battery, a headphone jack and IR blaster, and it comes in around $500 to $600. However, it only has the Snapdragon 730G, which is a mid-tier processor, and only 6 gigs of RAM. Now, any of these phones would be great for most users, and most users would probably be satisfied with price, performance, looks, etc. of all 3. However, those techies out there, including myself, see that there are things missing from each one. So why don't we take the best of all 3 phones and combine them into the perfect smartphone? Let's start with the front. As you can see, we have a near bezel-less display. For the sake of options and preferences, we will say this phone comes in 6.4-inch and 5.7-inch screen size variants. These would be Samsung displays with a 1440p resolution that can be scaled down to 1080p or 720p to save on battery, like many Samsung devices. This will also be a 90Hz variable rate display for buttery smooth performance. It will be an 18:9 or 2:1 aspect ratio. This will all be covered by the latest Gorilla Glass, which is currently Gorilla Glass 6. It is a flat, non-curving display to avoid accidental touches, and the slim bezel around the phone protrudes a couple millimeters to protect the phone screen when the phone is dropped. The front-facing camera could be on a mechanical pop-up with a front-facing flash, but if you're anything like me, you are weary of moving parts on a smartphone. Instead, I would opt for the new tech being developed by Xiaomi and Oppo and go with an under-display camera. This camera will be a 32 megapixel camera that can record up to 4K, 60 frames per second, and 1080p 240 frames per second. This is also where the proximity and ambient light sensors will live. Also under the display is a large fingerprint sensor which takes up nearly 1/3 of the bottom of the phone, so you don't have to be too precise on where you place your finger when you unlock the phone. On the right side of the phone is the power button, and on the left side is the volume rocker. These will be placed high enough to not be pressed accidentally when holding the phone, but not too high as to make it difficult to reach with one hand. The level of the volume rocker is slightly higher vertically on the phone, so as to not warrant accidental presses when squeezing the power button, but close enough that you can easily press the volume down and power button simultaneously with one hand for screenshots. On the top of the phone we have an IR blaster so you can control your TV and other devices, and on the bottom of the phone we have a USB-C port and a headphone jack. As you can see, we also have 2 front-facing speakers squeezed up in these small bezels, as well as a small LED notification light which can be toggled on or off. The sides will be equipped with pressure sensors for active edge so you can squeeze the phone to activate the Google Assistant. Now let's flip the phone over to the back. To one-up the recent Xiaomi phone, this phone will have a 6-camera array. First is the main camera, 108 megapixels or 27 megapixels in normal camera mode, which simply combines 4 adjacent pixels to provide the best light data for the picture. This is how Xiaomi uses their 108 megapixel camera sensor. The second is a 20 megapixel wide-angle lens, third is a 20 megapixel 2x telephoto lens, fourth is a 20 megapixel 5x telephoto lens with up to 50x hybrid zoom, and fifth is a 12 megapixel macro lens. All 5 of these cameras can shoot in 4K 60 frames per second and 1080p 960 frames per second, all of which are also optically and electronically image stabilized. The sixth lens is a simple 2 megapixel time of flight depth sensor to help with portrait shots and focus. In addition to these lenses, there will be spectral and flicker sensors similar to Pixel phones to further improve camera quality. There are also 3 microphones on the back to provide stereo sound and ambient noise cancellation. The first 2 are placed on either side of the phone, with a third placed in the center. Next, we have a rear fingerprint sensor. Yes, there will be a fingerprint sensor on the front and the back of this device. They each have their pros and cons, and I think having both will fulfill the needs and use case for everyone. This fingerprint sensor will also have a heart rate monitor similar to Samsung phones of old. Now let's get to the internals. This phone will have a minimum of 8 gigs of RAM with options up to 16 gigs. Snapdragon 865 processor, which is to be released in about a month. Expandable storage and a dual SIM card slot. UFS 3.0. 30-watt wireless charging and 15-watt reverse wireless charging. 65-watt wired fast charging. For the 6.4-inch variant, a 5,500 mAh battery and a 5,000 mAh battery for the 5.7-inch variant. 5G capable along with Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5. NFC and MST, which is the way in which Samsung phones emit a magnetic signal to card readers so you can tap and pay on card terminals that don't have NFC built in, like at Walmart. Google's Titan security chip and Pixel neural core for onboard cloudless Google Assistant and better image processing. And this phone will be IP68 certified and will be running the latest version of Android. Now, while there is a huge debate on Android versus iOS, and there always will be, I do think Android is going to be the preferred option of most users. It is more versatile, more customizable, and more feature-rich. Now, I have been an Android purist using stock Android for years, but I realize Samsung and other manufacturers' skins on Android provide a lot of desirable functionality, so this phone would be a good mix of stock Android for the look and performance of the operating system, but with the additional features Samsung and other manufacturers often include on their phones, such as scheduled text messages, built-in VPN support, and so on. All of this to be included at the price of $899 for the 6.4-inch phone and $829 for the 5.7-inch phone. Now, while this may seem like pie in the sky, everything I mentioned is theoretically possible. Every spec and feature listed is included in smartphones on the market right now, just no one has yet to combine them all into this type of loaded package. Some of you may also think that the most ridiculous thing mentioned so far is the price of $899. But if you check the specs and features of the Xiaomi and Asus phones mentioned earlier, each of those phones are under $600, so getting everything else for an additional $300 isn't far-fetched. In fact, I predict the phone that will get the closest to this ideal smartphone will be produced by Xiaomi in February 2020. Leaks suggest that the Xiaomi Mi Mix 4 or Xiaomi Mi 10 could have the under-display camera, bezel-less display, large battery, and other high-end specs. Anyway, let me know what I missed and what you would consider the perfect smartphone in the comments below, or if you would like a smartphone like this. Also, let me know if you would be interested in a video about the perfect operating system, which would be a mix of Android and iOS, taking the best features of each. Also, please tweet this video to Xiaomi, Asus, Samsung, and Google so we can let them know what we consider the perfect smartphone. Maybe one day, one of them will produce the perfect smartphone just like this.